so much for joining me. My name's Hayley and I love talking all things books, so if that sounds like something you might be interested in, then please consider subscribing. We have come to the end of another month, so this video is going to be all of the books that I read in the month of March, and I had a pretty good reading month. It felt like March went so quickly and I really loved some of the books that I read. This was kind of a weird month for me in terms of my reading. I read 2 romance books and the rest was all non-fiction, and in total I read 9 books across the month, so that is quite a lot of non-fiction. But unfortunately I didn't get to any of the books that I had put on my autumn TBR, so I'm very keen to get into some fantasy series this month. But let's get into the books that I read this month. The first book that I read this month was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I absolutely loved this. I rated it 4.75 stars, and it's definitely a new favourite fantasy romance for me. If you don't know, Divine Rivals is a historical fantasy romance, and we're set in a world where gods exist and they've been at war, and this has been impacting the humans. So we follow Iris, who lives in this town called Oath, and her brother has gone off to war, leaving Iris with her alcoholic and barely there mum. So in order to support herself and to support her mum, she's had to quit school, and I think she's only like 16 or 17 at the start of the book, and so she's had to quit school and go and find a job. And the job she finds is to be a journalist at the local paper called the Oath Gazette. And she's having a hard time. Her mum is pretty horrible. She is struggling with money, and so she's been writing on this magical typewriter that she got from her grandmother in the hopes that they will reach her brother. But what she doesn't know is the person on the other end of this typewriter, the person who has been reading and responding to her letters, is her rival at the paper that she works at, and his name is Roman Kit. So that's the kind of rival situation that we've got going. They're rivals at work because they're both competing for the same columnist job. But I will say that rival storyline does end much earlier than I expected in the book. But I was fine with that because where the plot ended up going was really fun. And they kind of go on this adventure together, and that part was really fun. I loved that this, while it was fantasy, it was almost a more historical fiction kind of a setting, and it just had these little sprinkles of magic throughout. Obviously there were the gods, and I really loved hearing about the myths of the gods, but there were also little bits of magic just in their little town, like obviously the magical typewriter, supermarkets where they would push only the things that you can afford to the front. The house that Roman lives in leaves him like tea and biscuits or something when he's having a bad day. Just like cute little things like that. As much as I love really intense fantasy, I feel like I'm learning that I also love these kind of more cozy, kind of lower stakes fantasies, like this where it's only got little bits of magic throughout. It kind of reminded me of Encyclopedia of Fairies. That book I also loved, and it was similar where it was kind of set in a historical world, but obviously in this world there were fae and fairies. Also, I listened to the audiobook of this one, which I 100% recommend. It was narrated by 2 British narrators, and they both did both Roman and Iris so well. I loved their voices, and overall the romance was cute as well. I loved the romance plotline for, I'd say, the first like 70% of the book, but I don't want to spoil anything, but I don't love how it ended up. Yeah, I just didn't really love it. I just didn't really love the romance ending, but the story ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, so I'm excited to get into the second book. This is part of a duology, and obviously the second book is already out, so I need to get to it very soon. Overall, a very fun fantasy romance. And then after I finished that one, I started a vlog all about Women's History Month, and my goal was to read as many books written by or about strong women over the course of the month, and I ended up reading 6 books. So the next 6 books are all of those that I read in that vlog. So I won't go into too much detail because I have spoken about them in depth in that vlog, and at some points a little bit too much in depth because I got so passionate about some of these topics that video ended up being way longer than I thought it would be. But the first book that I read for that video was All in Her Head by Elizabeth Comen, and this one is a non-fiction written by an oncologist, Elizabeth. And in this book she basically talks about what she's seen as an oncologist. So she talks about her personal experience with women's health and how we're behind in terms of research and the medicine available to women. And she also goes in depth into the history around women's healthcare around the world, but a lot of this book is focused in America, and the ways that women have been mistreated and left out of medicine in history, and how that has affected us to this day, and as a result we're behind in so many areas. I like how she set this book up so that each chapter is about a different part of the body. And it's so insane how every single part of the body has some kind of story, something that happened in history that is just horrible in terms of the way that women have been mistreated. Throughout, there is a little bit of information around our bodies and learning about ourselves and how to deal with different things that women do have to deal with. But overall, this one felt a little bit less practical in terms of actually learning about our bodies, and more of just the history around why we're at where we are now, which was so interesting as well. I did enjoy it. I rated this one 5 stars, and for the fact that it was so information heavy, I never felt like it was a chore to read. It was set out really well. I really did enjoy my reading experience of this one. At times it did feel a little bit long, but yeah, I was interested in the topic that she was talking about, so it was an interesting read. And I did also love that throughout all of the really horrible things that she was talking about, there was kind of a tone of hopefulness. For each part of the body, she shows how things used to be and also how they've progressed to a point where women patients are finally being listened to, and we're finally finding our voices, and the world is finally listening. Yeah, so that was a good one to start the vlog off with, because it really did get me passionate about the topic and about feminism in general, and I felt really like I really wanted to get out there and learn more about different topics, which is what I did. So after that one, I read The New Age of Sexism by Laura Bates, and this one I rated 4 stars. I did really like this as well. I listened to the audiobook for this one that I got from my library, and it was a great reading experience. It was narrated by the author, and you could really hear all throughout her emotions and her passion for this topic. When she was feeling sadness for these young girls that she talks about, you could really hear it in her voice, and you could hear the anger about some of the topics she spoke about as well. So I would definitely recommend listening to the audiobook. So while in the last book we focus a lot on misogyny in our history and how it's kind of getting better, there's a general sense of hope, as I said. In this one, we focus a lot more on the problems that we're facing right now and that we're going to be facing in the future when it comes to AI and the technological developments that are happening really quickly at the moment. And there were some really terrifying things that she speaks about. She talks about incels and the loneliness epidemic that we're facing at the moment. Since reading this one, I watched the Manosphere documentary, and while they were focused on different topics, it was very related, and it's terrifying what's happening on the internet at the moment. But some of the topics that she covers in this book are things like deep fakes, the metaverse and virtual reality games like that, sex dolls, and these kind of sex doll brothels that you can go to in Amsterdam. And it's really cool. You can see she's done so much research throughout writing this book, because she has personal takes on some of these games that she has spent time playing to find out what happens in them, and she actually goes to one of these places in Amsterdam and things like that. She also spends a bit of time going through the environmental impacts that AI has and the impact of running these data centers that are needed to keep AI running. Being someone who is on the internet and, you know, uses social media, there was a lot in this that I already knew about, but she did a really good job of outlining why some of these things are scarier than society seems to be caring about. And there was also a lot of things that I did learn. And overall, I also got very angry from this one. So overall, a very interesting listen. And I feel like it would be useful for a lot of men to read this one. But yeah, a great audiobook as well. And I did learn a lot. And then the next book that I read for that vlog was The Elements of Marie Curie by Dava Sobel. And this one was also an audiobook. This one was definitely my least favorite book that I read for that video, and my least favorite of the month as well. Just something about the writing was a bit cold, and it was very much like a list of facts. And I never really felt like we got the author's opinions on anything or her emotions at all, which I get, like, I feel like that was just the point of the book, but it just wasn't the most interesting reading experience. And I also knew going into this one that this would focus a lot on science. Obviously, Marie Curie was a scientist, but I just feel like she went way too in depth into each experiment. And unless you're someone who already knows a lot about science, it would just go straight over your head, and it did for me. And they were just so long, those parts as well, so I would just kind of zone out during those parts. It was a little bit disappointing because I was very excited for this one. Marie Curie is somebody that I hadn't heard too much about, but I know that she was an extremely intelligent woman and a pioneer for women in science. She was a 2 times Nobel Prize winner, and I'm pretty sure she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize as well. In her career, she discovered the elements polonium and radium, and she coined the term radioactivity. So this book goes through her life from her childhood. She grew up in Poland when they were under Russian rule, and so her parents had to fight basically to get her and her siblings into school, and they went to these like secret schools in order to get an education. So we follow her from there to leaving and studying in Paris, to her meeting her husband, the work that they did together, and all of her discoveries through her lifetime. And then we also learn about her daughters and eventually her death. And we also go into detail about the women that Marie Curie mentored over her lifetime, and we kind of get their stories as well, the difficulties they faced as women in science, and just how Marie helped so many women to get to where they ended up. There were also a lot of interesting parts about the difficulties that women faced at the time in having to either choose between their love and their marriage or their careers and continuing on with science. In a lot of cases, if they chose marriage, they'd be fired from their jobs, as well as just the difficulties that Marie faced throughout her career, just being a woman. Things like her husband would always be the one to speak at events about their joint work. She would often be labelled his assistant instead of the 50-50 work that they would do together. There were even cases of her not being allowed to attend events because women weren't allowed there. And then for her, this kind of ended after her husband's death, and eventually she was more and more respected in the industry. But then oftentimes she would be the only person in the room at a lot of these events. So that was very interesting to learn about. And just overall, it was cool to see how ahead of her times she was and how much she helped women in science. And it was really sad to see how her health over time faded because of her excessive exposure to radium through her career. And overall, it was okay. I learnt some interesting facts about Marie Curie and about science, so it was definitely worth the listen, but I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. And then the next book that I read for that Women's History Month vlog was It's Not Hysteria by Tang. And this one I did really enjoy. I rated it 4 stars. It was extremely informative and so helpful. I think it should be a book that is read by any woman at any age. And this one also had that deeply angering side as well. I think anyone who's also interested in women's health issues should also read this one. So the author of this book, Tang, is a gynecologist or a gynecological surgeon, and she basically used her knowledge to put together kind of like a handbook on all things women's health that you could think of. She goes a little bit into the history of women's health, and there were some similarities in these parts between this one and All in Her Head, but for the majority, this one had a lot more useful information about the now and our bodies and how to identify different health issues, just learning about the parts of the body and the different diseases and illnesses that can happen in the different parts of the body, learning about our cycle, people who suffer from really bad period pains. I think this could be useful to so many women out there. And she even goes in depth in one chapter into trans and LGBTQI+ people and the issues that transgender people face with their healthcare. I also really appreciated that at the end of every single chapter, she kind of did a little bit of a wrap up of the most important information that she had given over the course of that chapter, because some of them were really long and dense and information heavy. So this was a chance to kind of like to think about some of the more important things that she talked about. Yeah, it was just really helpful given how much information there was. And overall, I just think that this one is such an important information handbook for every woman out there to read about and to learn a bit more about their bodies. It was definitely very information heavy and sometimes a little bit less entertaining, but I just appreciated it so much for what it was, and I can just see how helpful it would be for so many people. Oh, and of course, the title, Hysteria, she also talks a bit about hysteria and the ways that women have been told that our health issues are all in our head over the course of history. And yeah, she had some very similar takes to the author of All in Her Head. But overall, a 4-star read, and I would 100% recommend. Then the next book that I read for that video was Positive Obsession by Susana Morris. And this was a biography about Octavia E. Butler, who was a science fiction writer and one of the first Black women science fiction writers of her time. I went into this one knowing a little bit about Octavia Butler, not too much. I had heard about a few of her science fiction books, and I have a few of them on my TBR. Especially after reading this, I'm so excited to read some of them. But I had also heard that she had been called a genius and that she was just extremely intelligent. And I had heard about her insane writing routine, that she had gotten up at like 2 a.m. in the morning to keep up her writing while she worked these factory jobs. But after reading this, I have just so much respect for her, for what she went through in her life, for her views on feminism and on politics, and I'm just excited to read some of her books. You can really tell that the author was a huge fan of Octavia and of her books by the way that she wrote this, and as a result, this was a really, really great book, and it was so informative on not only Octavia's fiction books, but on the things that were happening around her at different times of her life, the things that were happening in America, in politics, and just in her personal life as well, and how they really inspired her to write these books, and how the themes in the books relate to the politics that were happening at the time. It was so interesting to learn that Octavia, according to the author, was neurodivergent, and this wasn't a term that anyone knew of at the time. So she really faced a lot of difficulties in school. Her teachers would call her lazy and undisciplined, and she struggled through her life as a writer in the way that she perceived herself and her low productivity that she thought she had because of her teachers. And the way that she figures out how to learn and she kind of develops hacks to make her life easier and to make her research easier was really interesting as well. I do wish that I read this book after reading through Octavia's science fiction books, just because the author goes so into detail about each book, their themes, what happens in each book, and even to some extent the endings, because she talks about how these endings relate to the themes that are happening in real life and in politics. But it was a little bit annoying because there were obviously spoilers, and I felt like I had to skim some of these chapters, which would have been really interesting as well. So I do think that I would definitely go back and read her little analysis about each book after I've read them, and just to see if the themes that she talks about I noticed as I was reading them as well. Overall, I was impressed by how easy to read this was, and I would definitely recommend to anyone who is a fan of Octavia Butler and has maybe read her books and would like to learn a bit more about the things that inspired her to come up with these themes that she ended up writing about. I think this was the shortest book that I read for this video, and yeah, it was an easy read. It was very entertaining, and I would definitely recommend. So the last book that I read for that video and the last non-fiction book that I read for the month was Educated by Tahereh Westover, and this was 100% my favorite book that I read for the video, and possibly my favorite book of the month as well. It was a solid 5-star read. And I also listened to the audiobook for this one, and it was actually narrated by one of my all-time favorite audiobook narrators, Julia Whelan. So yeah, that was great. She did it perfectly, and I would definitely recommend listening to that audiobook. So Educated is a memoir by Tahereh Westover, and it's about her life growing up in a very strict Mormon family. She lived just outside a small town in Idaho, kind of right under the mountains, in like a farm junkyard kind of a house. Her dad had very radical Mormon views of no schooling, no hospitals or doctors, very strict views about modesty in women. And he was also terrified of the world ending, so they would spend their summers canning fruit and preparing for the apocalypse. He was also extremely abusive and aggressive, and she definitely didn't have a very easy upbringing. It was very sad to read about, but we basically follow her from her childhood, being forced to work in the junkyard, doing physical manual labor every day and not getting any kind of schooling, to her getting a bit older, getting interested in activities like dancing and singing, and she eventually finds her way to a musical at the local school. And then we eventually follow her through to when she is an older teenager and she really wants to get an education. So she leaves home at 17 and goes to college, and when she's there she faces a lot of difficulties because obviously she's had very limited interaction with people through growing up, and she's very different to everyone there, so she has those struggles. And she also faces a lot of mental health issues that come from the manipulation and the brainwashing that she experienced through her childhood, and that she continues to face because she keeps in contact with her family and she goes back to visit, but it's just so toxic. And it's really sad seeing the way that her, even though she's kind of escaped, it still affects her in her everyday life. But it was amazing to see her kind of discover feminism and realize all of the things that she had been taught by her family were just wrong. And it was so interesting when she's first starting out at college, she hears about the term bipolar for the first time and she relates it to her dad, and that's when she kind of realizes that that is the mental illness that he has. And she is so inspiring by how she goes from getting this college education to eventually moving to England and studying at at Cambridge University. And the book is just written so beautifully. It was almost emotional thinking about all that she had been through and where she was able to get to in life with what her family put her through. And yeah, it was just 100% a 5-star read, so beautifully written, and it's just overwhelming when you think about the fact that this book, which was written so well, was written by somebody who didn't step foot into a classroom until she was 17. So I would 100% recommend and definitely listen to the audiobook. And that is Educated by Tahereh Westover. So after finishing those 6 non-fiction books, I was pretty excited to finally be able to get into some more entertaining fiction books. And the first one that I picked up was Imagine Me by Tahereh Mafi. And this one is the final novel in the Shatter Me series. It's number 6. And I was so excited to be finally getting to the last novel in this series. And now I only have one more book left in the series, which is number 6.5, which is a novella that I'm currently in the middle of. That one's called Imagine Me. But I obviously can't say too much about this one. It's the 6th book in a series, but Shatter Me is based in a dystopian world. We follow Juliet, who has been locked away in an asylum because her touch is lethal. And one day she meets someone who she can touch and it doesn't hurt them, and we follow her from there. I rated this one 3.5 stars. It was okay. I did enjoy the overall plot that was happening throughout this one. It was very different from what I expected the series would go, and it was interesting, but I do feel like that plot, it was this huge horrible thing that was happening, and it just seemed to get wrapped up way too easily. It just kind of like in the last 10% got wrapped up, resolved, and it just seemed way too easy and convenient in my opinion. But I still did enjoy the book overall, and it still had that really easy to read writing. Every book in this series is very quick and easy to read, and it still did have that humor that I loved, especially from Kenji. And an underrated character is Brendan. I feel like no one talks about Brendan, but he, especially in this one, he was so wholesome. He does this little tea ritual that he forces everyone to do, because I think he must have been from England before the world kind of got uprooted and turned into what it is now for them. So it's pretty much all he has left of what used to be England is tea. And it's just so sweet. And the ending was super cute. I did love that. And I'm very excited to get through the novella, which is the last book in the series, and to finally be done with this series. So that is Imagine Me, and I rated this 3.5 stars. And then the final book that I read this month was Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison. And I have this beautiful copy. This is the 3rd book in the Love Light Farm series, and this one follows Layla and Caleb, and we've met both of them in the previous 2 books. Layla is also a co-owner of Love Light Farms with Stella and Beckett, but she runs the bakehouse on the farm, which is such a cute setting. I loved that. And I was a little bit worried about this one because I'll always be obsessed with the first book in the series, Love Light Farms, but I didn't love the 2nd book in the series, which was In the Weeds, and that was Beckett's book. But thankfully, I was obsessed with this one. I loved it so much. It was so wholesome and cute. I loved Layla and I loved Caleb, and I loved how much of the town, the small town that they live in, was involved in this one. And I loved the baking and the cakes and the croissants. And this one really just had the magic. Whatever the magic was that was in Love Light Farms, it was in this one too. And I would even say that I don't think I could choose which one is my favorite now. I love them both just as much as each other, which is saying something, because I say that Love Like Farms is one of my all-time favorite romances. So this was I rated it 4.5 stars, but I don't know, I think I might change that to 5 stars. I just loved it so much. So in this one we follow Layla, and we know from the previous books that she has just been having a tough time when it comes to love and relationships and dating. She's just had bad luck. All she wants is a nice guy who makes her feel excited, but for some reason she just keeps getting these jerks. And so on one of these dates that goes really badly, she ends up getting left at the venue by this guy that she's on a date with, and they're at this like fun tiki bar, and when she gets stranded there, she happens to run into Caleb. And we've also met Caleb in the last couple of books. He was working as the town's policeman, but in this one he has been fired because he's just too nice. Like, he was letting too many like parking tickets go and things like that, and he doesn't think that that job was right for him. So at the start of this one, he's working in the local school as a Spanish teacher, and yeah, so when they meet at this tiki bar, he offers to take her home, and on this car ride they're both talking about their dating issues and the bad luck that they've both been facing. And they decide to kind of help each other out by going on dates together. It's kind of like a fake dating trope, but a little bit different, because they're basically just going on these dates to give each other tips on what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right, and just to see how they can help each other out. Caleb's story is interesting because the bad luck that he's been having is because he's just too nice of a guy. He, like I said, he was fired from being the local police officer because he was letting people go. He is just that person that helps out everyone. He's got a huge family and he is always helping out his grandma. I love his family. He's always got like hundreds of cousins around, and they're always eating good food, and that part of it's really great as well. But yeah, he's just this really, really wholesome, sweet, nice guy who gets too invested in relationships. And it's really cute because you can tell that he has been obsessed with Layla. We kind of saw that in the last books, because it's hinted at one point that he is just constantly buying cakes from her just to be able to see her. And in this one, his morning routine is to go by the bakery, buy a coffee and one of her amazing croissants, and yeah, he's just in love. This one is definitely guy falls first, which I love. And I love that the fake dating doesn't really have that miscommunication trope that normally happens with fake dating, because it's all just because they're both just being very honest with each other about their feelings. The main conflict is Layla, and she has to overcome these feelings that she has about being worthy, which was really sad to watch. And I love that Caleb 100% falls first. Layla never really noticed Caleb as anything but a friend until they bump into each other at the tiki bar and something just changes for her. I don't know if it's about the change in setting or what he's wearing or something, but she's like, holy shit, he's hot. And that's cute, but he has just always been obsessed with her. And overall, it was a pretty perfect romance for me. I loved the setting, I loved the relationship, I loved their friends, and being back in the small town. It was just amazing. I would 100% recommend this series, and I'm so excited to get into the last book in the series, which is Business Casual. And this one follows Nova and Charlie. I'm so excited for this one. They're both siblings of two of the characters that we have met in the last books. And I love Charlie, so I'm excited to see his romance. So that was all of the books that I read this month. I am also in the middle of 3 books right now, but they're definitely going to flow over into April, so I'll talk about them at the end of next month. The first one is Believe Me. This is the last book in the Shatter Me series. This is the final novella, and I think I'm already like halfway through this, so I should be finishing it pretty soon. It's so far just very cute and sweet. We kind of finished up the plot in the last book, and this one's just kind of a cute little extended epilogue is what it seems like so far. So I'm enjoying that one. And I'm also in the middle of Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed, and I am obsessed. I think the book's in my bedroom, it's not in front of me right now, but I am also about halfway through that one, and I'm obsessed. I think I'm loving it way more than I thought I would, but again, I will talk about my thoughts at the end of next month. And the audiobook that I'm in the middle of is Next of Kin by Hannah Bonin Young, and I'm only like just 10% of the way into this one so far, but I'm really liking the audiobook. I like the narrator, she's great, and so far I really like the writing, and the plot is very interesting as well. It's called Next of Kin because the two main characters that we follow are both trying to adopt their siblings. Our main character, Chloe, was adopted when she was young, when she was a kid, and her biological mum has just had another baby, but she is an alcoholic. She is not someone who's fit to raise a child, so Chloe has decided to take on this baby and raise her, and so far I'm loving that plot line. But yeah, for her to be able to keep this baby, she has to move in with Warren, who is also looking after his younger brother, and he has a solid job, but they're struggling to find a place to live, whereas Chloe has a 2-bedroom apartment, but because she's now become a full-time mother, she's had to give up some work, and she is struggling to get approval for the adoption because of her income. So that's a very interesting plot, and I am liking it so far. I really like Chloe. I'm not sure how I feel about Warren, but yeah, as I said, I'm not too far into it, so I will talk about my thoughts at the end of next month. So that was all of the books that I read in the month of March. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. I really appreciate you being here, and hopefully I'll see you in my next one. Bye!